untitled.edu, and she'll be able to handle any recertification or certification questions for you. And she's also going to drop that over here in the chat screen that you see. Speaking of chat, please feel free to utilize the Zoom chat. It can be found on the bottom toolbar of your Zoom. It has the option to cheer each other on as speakers are speaking, send praise, clap, and to share with all of your participants. While there are options to private message, we strongly encourage you to use this feature minimally so that all of our participants are able to actively listen to these incredible speakers we have here today. There will be some breakout rooms. You signed up for breakout rooms when you registered for the conference, and then Sima, our speaker, will also have an additional breakout room in her presentation towards the end of the conference. We encourage you to participate actively in the breakout rooms throughout the entirety of your session. We'll send out reminders periodically through broadcast, letting you know when we'll return to the main forum. This afternoon, we have our DEI award presentation with Anna and Brandy. The presentation will begin at 11:05. So we look forward to celebrating this year's Licking County champions. At the end of our conference, you will have an opportunity to complete an evaluation. With any business and community organization, evaluations help us to prepare for our future. So we just ask that you stick around a little bit to do us a favor and complete this evaluation. We immediately begin planning for our next year's conference. So 2022, we're hoping we can all be in person again. So this will help us with our planning for next year. Keep in mind, we do read all of your feedback as a committee in order to also plan the topics for future conferences as well. So toward the end of the event today, you're going to see a link to that evaluation here in the chat box as well. With breaks, don't worry, we have you covered. We have a few scheduled breaks for you to stand up, move around, grab a snack, or utilize the restroom. So I'll let you know when those breaks are coming as well. So we're just going to go ahead and begin with this conference this year. Over the last 10 months and 2 weeks, if we want to be exact, we've witnessed ongoing waves of civil unrest through riots and protests. As I reflected on these months in preparation for today, I really wanted to focus on the progress that has come from this unrest instead of the obstacles that we continue to face both nationally and internationally. This racial unrest precipitated a national American cultural reckoning on topics of racial injustice. Public opinion of racism itself and discrimination quickly began to shift when we began acknowledging systematic advantages and disadvantages due to race. The demonstrators revived a public campaign for the removal of Confederate monuments and memorials, as well as other historic symbols such as statues celebrating American slaveholders and modern display of the Confederate battle flag. With public backlash, it widened to other institutional symbols, including places, namesakes, musicians, brands, and cultural practices. Anti-self-education has become a trend since June of 2020 in the United States. Companies and organizations like my own employer are doing the work, not checking boxes. We're creating diverse, equity, and inclusive safe spaces for all of our employees. They're giving us agency for those of us who have experience in the space to lead positive change. We have Black anti-racist writers who have found new audiences, and they find their place on New York Times bestseller lists and other bestseller lists. American consumers are seeking out Black-owned businesses to support through their day-to-day buying, as well as buying gifts or celebrating holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, and things of that nature. American consumers are seeing Black-owned businesses to support out there throughout the media and on different websites and platforms. And all of the community and people are leveling up. They're having conversations just like we're doing today here in this space. So to quote Amanda Gorman, and so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so that we can reach out our arms to one another here today. I invite you to welcome our first speaker this morning, Eric Jorrey, Professor of Sociology at Central Ohio Technical College, as we begin with a conversation about equity and equality. So join me in welcoming Eric.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it, and fantastic introduction to everybody. Welcome everybody to again. I'd like to give my well wishes to everybody, and thank you so much for being here. And just your presence here is definitely a step in the right direction. With our theme for this year's conference, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the similarities and or especially differences between equality and equity. And so one way that I thought that we could do that this morning is with how technology is kind of taken over with everybody. And a lot of times we look for a nice, simple explanation or graphic or meme to get a point across. I thought we could maybe analyze one of the more popular memes when it comes to equity and equality this morning. So before we do that, though, I think we need to take a few moments to just kind of think a little bit about both equity and equality as well too. So if we're thinking about these concepts, I know in recent years it probably seems that these are new terms with a renewed emphasis, but both terms have a pretty long history as far as thinking about these things from a social justice perspective. As a sociologist, I of course am going to always base things on some of the classic social theories, which then kind of tie into moral philosophy. And I promise I won't talk much about this for everybody today, but I just wanted to point out that these ideas are really rooted in some Enlightenment theories with moral philosophy. If we think of just generally consequentialism, the idea that if we want to see what's right, or what our right actions are, what things are not right to do, is that the result of the effect of an act is really the only true measure. If we think of the consequences of things, maybe we need to have a branch of that and think about the utilitarian effect. If we think of classic utilitarianism, we need to, as its founder proponent Jeremy Bentham says that we really have to try to measure the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. That really is the true measure of right and wrong. It's similar in a lot of ways to maybe egoism or even altruism. Egoism says that the best measure is what's right for oneself with our ego, regardless of other people. And the opposite of that almost is being altruistic or altruism as a philosophy that says that the individual doesn't matter, but that it's everybody else that matters. And that's the true measure of right and wrongness. Utilitarianism sort of combines those two a little bit and says it's not just you and it's not just other people. We really need to look at everybody as a whole and how we're all integrated and a part of the society. And so when we think about those things and what is our outcome that we want to look at, a lot of times we talk about equality, and many times we also talk equity. And maybe some of you, and I'm guessing a lot of people that you know, really feel that you can interchange those terms and that equality and equity are synonymous with one another. In actuality, they have a very broad, I guess, similarity, but they really are different concepts, even looking at the history of the terms here. If we're talking just equality, I think the easiest way to think of that is just the idea of the sameness, where people have the same rights. They have the same social status. They have the same opportunities. When we generally talk about equality, we're talking about those rights and opportunities, whether it's the right to be a free person or the right to vote, the right to have your voice be heard. We do not want discrimination or differential treatment when it comes to the moment-to-moment things in our society. Equity, on the other hand, it can mean equal shares, but it can also mean that these shares need to be determined by need, ability, or results, as Blanchard said as well. So I think before we look at our graphic here, that we can think about equality as sameness. You know, every person has the same worth as a human being, and everybody deserves equal treatment, to have the same treatment. That is a very universal norm that we have in the United States now, where sometimes some of the controversies and differences of opinions occur when it comes to the fact that maybe there are disadvantages inherent in some groups because of our history versus others. So equity is a lot more about fairness and justice. Like equality, it's the same worth, but sometimes there needs to be different treatment so that every single person can be their best self. To have that opportunity, I think, for the pursuit of happiness in the best way. This very small graphic kind of shows here to where if every person in class gets a bicycle, uh, that's equal, that's equality. But notice that if you do not have the ability to walk, that bicycle is not going to do you much good, and the outcome is not going to be the same. So maybe spending a little bit more money on a modified bicycle that could be ridden is the way to go. Another analogy that really helps, I think, with equality and equity is just trying to enter a building. It's too bad we can't be in person for this conference today and that we're virtual, but it's assuming that we were at a face-to-face conference, if they just build a set of stairs to go up into the meeting room, all of us would have that same opportunity to go up the stairs. It's equal for everybody. Everybody can go in the front door. The problem is that if some people are maybe carrying 60 pounds of boxes, or somebody is not able to use their legs, or somebody has other accessibility issues, it's equal, but it definitely is not equitable because everybody doesn't have that chance to move up a lot of times. The graphic or meme that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation here, dating back almost 10 years from its original illustrator, Craig Frohol. I'm guessing that some of you, if not a lot of you, have maybe seen this floating around the internet or seen it on people's Facebook pages or in other graphics. It's a pretty classic and iconic image that really helps to get the point across about equality and equity. You'll notice in the picture that you see on your screen to the left that we have equality in that picture. Every one of these three individuals has a box to stand on to see the baseball game. You'll notice, of course, though, that one of our individuals does not have a very good view. And so even though there is that sameness, not everybody can see the game, the desired outcome. So notice that in an equity situation, we do not have the same distribution of boxes. The taller individual does not have the box, of course, and even though there's still three boxes, now you have all three individuals able to enjoy the benefits of the baseball game. This is a very classic illustration. It shows how you can have the outcome that's really desired as far as everybody having that fairness and that justice as far as the outcomes are concerned. And even though that is the original graphic, the graphic that we see a lot of times has been cartooned a little bit as far as taking out the actual baseball image, probably for copyright reasons, and really showing it to show that from a racial minority standpoint, that it can help explain some of those different opportunities here. So this is the classic image. We see it, it has that point that we get across really, really well. As we introduce this topic to discuss today, I wanted to break this picture down because if we're really thinking about equality and equity, there can be some potential problems with this viewpoint if we're using this to talk about the United States and to talk about our situation with equality and equity. So if we look at this, same exact image and point as the original, but notice, for example, here with some of the issues, does this cartoon moving boxes around address the real issue? And that in this case is that fence. That notice that there is a structural barrier. Regardless of how many boxes there are and how tall or short somebody is, there's still a fence that is blocking them from being part of society. You know, if you sort of think of the baseball field as being that opportunity to enjoy life. So the cartoon really doesn't address the fence issue at all. Another issue, and I hate to keep jumping back and forth, but I think looking at these issues and then relaying it back to the picture sort of helps. There's the issue that they are outside. And so some critics of this simple analogy think that it could further divide everybody, that we put up these barriers, not only physically, but that we can see from just a emotional standpoint, from an ideological standpoint, that we have this mass of people in the crowd that we could think of as the United States, and are we really thinking that there's people that are outsiders and that they're trying to get in and trying to look at that? That is problematic as far as one of the messages that this cartoon can really relay. And so that's an issue. The other one that might be kind of troublesome as well is that even though these individuals are outside, notice that they are trying to watch the baseball game. And just looking at the situation, sometimes people have that problem to where all those people in the crowd are paying customers. They entered the game correctly. And so are these individuals trying to game the system, or they're trying to get something for free that other people pay with? That obviously is not the message at all that we want to convey with both equality and equity. You can see how problematic that is, especially from the outsider perspective, from trying to get something that somebody doesn't belong. That's a real issue with the graphic as well. And then also, which really from the research that I've done and just seeing this image around from a lot of years, we kind of take for granted the fact that there is that equality, but we don't have an equitable situation in this first picture, because we can see the shorter individual in the purple shirt can't see. And so some critics of this cartoon will say, are we placing too much emphasis on the individual person and individual responsibility? Along with not only ignoring the fence, we have the issue that this individual is not as tall. And so another problem with this graphic is it looking at some sort of personal defect, in that if you were just taller, you wouldn't need any boxes to start with. We live in a country that very much routinely celebrates the ideology of individualism. We have that really embedded in our mantra that no matter what barriers there are, if you work hard, you can succeed. That idea of the American dream. So even if you can't see things and you're a little shorter, isn't it really that person's responsibility? Do we need to help him out? Is it his job to make sure that he brings a few more boxes to the game to go over? It really is concerning that it places responsibility on that individual. And again, metaphorically, even if this seems like it's analyzing this way too much, there is that concern that we think of this person as less than, that they are not as fully developed. Between, obviously, we look at this and think child and parent. And our country, through institutional slavery, through the treatment of a lot of other minority populations, it has a very strong history of paternalism, where we will treat marginalized groups in a paternalistic way, almost as a parent does with a child, making sure they don't, they're not smart enough to do certain things. So we got to help them. We got to watch them as a parent does a small child. And so this is problematic when we're looking at this individual. It really speaks to this deficit thinking that many Americans can kind of put into place. It is that kid's fault that he can't see. Are they lagging behind? Or are they not as developed? And so even as we look at this cartoon, we can see that maybe this idea between equality and equity, maybe we can visualize this a little bit more accurately with the way things are. So these are all, and again, there's been other issues with the cartoon. Those are really the 4 or 5 largest issues that we have. So what do we do with this? Well, using this representation, we can sort of change the graphic a little bit here. We still have our situation of equality on the left-hand side with everybody looking at the game, but notice now that we've kind of removed the deficit thinking even when it comes to the 3 individuals, because it definitely looks like everybody is the same height and the same size. We can't infer any age or racial differences or anything like that. We have an equal situation when it comes to not only the people, but the boxes to watch the contest. Notice, however, that with both pictures, that the ground that they are standing on is not the same. And that really speaks to some of these structural issues when we're thinking about us and racial justice and how we can have equitable outcomes, because just keeping everything the same is going to sometimes disinclude other individuals, or I'm sorry, exclude everybody from the situation. So you have that ground situation. And one other thing that's a little difficult to see with the picture on the left is if you look at the yellow individual, you'll notice that he's peeking through a very small hole in the fence. And people have talked about that hole as kind of representing that opportunity to get through. Because when we think of equality and equity, we can look at examples of people that, despite very large structural and systemic barriers, are by all accounts very successful. We can point to people in positions of prestige and power and say, well, if this person can do it, why can't everybody else? And we know that the whole, it's just a very, very small amount of people. If you had a whole bunch of people trying to watch this baseball game, that hole is not going to be big enough, obviously, for everybody to view the game. And so that kind of helps look at that systemic or those structural issues a little bit. It's not 100% blocked access, but it makes it extraordinarily difficult for many, many individuals. And so rather than having the unequal ground and this kind of small hole, we can look to a more equitable outcome then, so that all three individuals can be included, even if the boxes are not lined up equally. And hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And I think with this very simplistic image, we would all agree, well, yeah, the person on the right is going to need a couple extra boxes. This graphic is not without criticism as well, because you'll notice that we have tripled the resources with the equitable outcome. And so we can maybe, look at other ways to address that. And maybe what the problem is not the amount of boxes or anything, but do we really just kind of change the structure of society? Adding that third outcome. We might have, equality in the first and equitably in the equitability in the second. But we don't need the boxes anymore if we actually try to change that systemic barrier. And so I think that's really something to think about as well. So when we see this image, when we can use it sometimes, maybe we need a different sports analogy. Looking through things, this is definitely something to think about for everybody as well, especially when the Olympics come around and the track and field events are going. We can see a lot of media coverage when we're looking at track and field events. And you'll notice whenever you see a track and field, and maybe you remember this if you did track in high school, that when you're running around the track, we know that the lengths between the inside lane and the outside lane are different. It's further away the more out you go as far as the lanes. And so that's why we always see individuals staggered as they are. And now you might just look at the second image here and think, well, that's not fair. The yellow colored individual is a lot further than the blue colored individual. But notice that it's still an equitable outcome, because you're going to give everybody that chance to be their best self. If it's just equal and they all start in the same spot, some people have further to go, if that makes sense. And so with this discussion of these cartoons here, if we try to put this into real life and move away from the graphics here, we need to really think, and something that we're going to do today in this conference is to not only look individually at what we can do, but how we can help to design and implement some more equitable situations in our communities because of these larger barriers like the fence. And so because of this, we obviously know that there are certain populations in our country and certain other demographics that really need more support than others. We do not have equitable outcomes when it comes to many of these crucial, critical components of our society, whether it's healthcare or education or criminal justice, economic situations and policy, media portrayals and coverage, neighborhoods, and even family structure and family support as well. Do we need to think not so much about sameness, but about fairness? And that's where equity really comes into play. You'll notice again, this cartoon here kind of moving forward is that in an equal situation, and we say every life matters the same. And so if when you ever hear anybody say that it's all lives matter instead of Black lives matter, they're coming at it from a place of equality because they want that sameness. And you can see with the cartoon here that regardless of any type of injury or pain or historical nature or opportunities or that ability to be your true self, that you don't have the resources, in this case the water, being shared equally. The house on the left obviously does not need to be hosed down. The house on the right definitely does. So I think that's always something to think about when you think about focusing specific attention on certain groups in our society as well. We hear and talk a lot, and maybe this is me more than others because I'm in the education sector here, but if it's not an achievement gap between different groups as far as their outcomes and tests and everything, is it not the grades that individuals are using or SAT scores or ACT scores? Is it more of an opportunity gap where it's access to knowledgeable teachers and dedicated faculty? Is it access to up-to-date textbooks and safe physical structures and building environments and community support and extracurriculars? So it's that difference between, is it really an achievement gap or an opportunity gap? And these issues we can see playing out in society here, even with the pandemic that's been going since last year. Just as an example of equality and equity, we know that the serious cases of COVID are not affecting certain demographics differently. If we break it down by race, we can see that Native American, Alaskan Native, Black and Latinx Americans are much more likely to be hospitalized. And we've seen these trends continue since last year at a much higher rate. If we give all of our equal treatments and medical attention equally among every group, I think it's hard to say that you will then have an equitable outcome, because certain groups, for a lot of different reasons, are affected differently. And sometimes if we look at our wealth distribution, our economic distributions, neighborhoods, the type of jobs that individuals are looking at, the access to healthcare, we get situations here, even just, last year, where we have Black and Latinx and Indigenous Americans being 3 times more likely to lose their life from this virus than white Americans. And so when we look at these health outcomes, approaching it from an equal standpoint might not do the job, to put it very, very mildly here. There is a reason that the federal government and Health and Human Services created the Office of Minority Health so many years ago, simply because there are racial and ethnic minorities that have different health outcomes and different health needs than white Americans. And to be able to address that so that every American gets the health care that they need, there needs to be that renewed focus on everything as well. I like Kuttner's graphic here as well too, to kind of wrap things up here, where we do not want to take all of the resources that we as a community can give to individuals for a variety of ways. Doing that equally is going to give things to some individuals that they're just not going to need or use in the idea of fairness or the idea of sameness, versus other groups that are going to be left lagging because of all of these historic and systemic and structural differences. So we kind of need to think and sometimes about how to create equity in the best possible way to where we need to have certain communities having more of our community resources so that we can really realize how we end up with equity, whether it's for age or income or especially racial and ethnic equity as well too. So I think that's a kind of a good place for everybody to get into and to start. I hope that gave everybody something to kind of think about today as we look at all of these other issues and everything as well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it as well. And I would say if you have any questions on this, please let me know at the end of the conference. I will provide my email for everybody. We will have an opportunity later today for that. So now, if I could, I would like to pass this on and kind of think about the humanity of equity, if we could as well. So thank you, everyone.
Good morning. Sarah?
Hi, Worley. I have next, we are moving into Dr. Love Benton. I have Deb Dingus, who is making an introduction of Dr. Benton before she begins her presentation.
Morning, everybody. I certainly want to welcome you to this year's conference. It was very inspiring to see our perspectives on our graphic this morning. So as we continue on with our discussion, I'd like to introduce to you our next speaker. Dr. J Love Benton is a current adjunct professor at Columbus State Community College and Temple University. She has a PhD in leadership and change. And she has quite a unique background, very diverse in her interest areas that intersect with several disciplines, including education, diversity, equity, inclusion, curriculum, development, teaching and learning, and the not-for-profit sector, including sexual assault, domestic violence, trauma-informed care, and the LGBT communities. We're very excited to have Dr. J. Benton with us this morning, so please welcome her.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Deb, for that introduction. Eric, thank you for setting the stage this morning and really showing and teaching us the difference between equity and equality. I would like to thank Dr. McDonald, Ms. Taylor, the Ohio State University, and the entire CIRC team for inviting me to be a part of this great conference. I'm going to share my screen. So my topic this morning is belonging begins here, the humanity of equity. When I think of belonging, I immediately begin to think of what? What am I belonging to? Today, I would like to offer that we all belong to humanity. And humanity, simply put, is all people. And because we belong to all people, that means that essentially we belong to each other. Because this land is your land. This land is my land. This land is our land, built by humanity's hands, intertwined with human being minds on a journey to find a life of equality, a life of equity, a journey toward belonging, connecting, a longing to be here now. Together, while taking a vow that our advantage won't separate us, because diversity is a must, the fabric of our spaces, weaving together stories and faces that shape our humanity. As we realize connection is the key to belonging, it's the path toward equity. The moment that we stop fighting for each other, that's the moment that we lose humanity. The moment that we dismiss each other, that's the moment that we birth insanity. The moment that we stay silent about harm to others, that's the moment that we give up on equity. The moment that we don't embrace equality, that's the moment we lose our humanity. See, belonging begins within. Working to understand where others have been, acceptance of our differences, empathetic of other situations, reflecting upon inclusion, race, and diversity, uniting us once again through humanity so that everyone, and as Eric put so eloquently, I mean, everyone can feel a sense of belonging. Our sense of belonging is really found in each other's lived experiences. Our humanity dwells in the lived experiences of each human being. You know, equity is really about the lived experiences of every human being in this world. And those lived experiences includes others' culture. It can include others' racial identity, educational background, family, religious backgrounds, external environments, sexuality. It includes the lived experiences and what people live every day. And that is different for everyone. Even when we have similarities, even when we are of the same race, even when we are of the same culture, even when we are of the same religious background, our lived experiences are still vastly different. It's kind of why you could live and grow up in a house with siblings and all of you have completely different experiences of what happened in that house and how you connected with your parents or lack of there, right? How did you experience school? You go to the exact same school. Completely different experiences. And so it's in those lived experiences, I believe, where equity really, really lies. And equity is interconnected with humanity because equity is the key component that declares the one thing that everybody really cares about, and that's that we matter. Equity says, you matter. And when we all matter, that means that we all have an opportunity to be at an advantage in our life. So then what's an advantage? Because we all have advantages. An advantage is a condition or circumstance that puts one in a favorable or superior position. And all 101 of us on this in this conference today, we all have some advantages. I, for instance, I have a PhD. I'm a professor, I'm an educator. I've held some very high positions. We can suggest that I have an educational advantage. And my educational advantage really is steeped in my childhood. I come from a family where my great uncle, back in the 1940s and 50s, was the first Black principal at a high school where we grew up. Educational advantage, where in my family, going to college was like the norm. That's what you were supposed to do. You didn't get another opportunity to do anything else. That was what you were doing. I have cousins and family members who are have their doctorates, they're lawyers. I have one cousin who became a lawyer and went back to school to get her master's of law. Like, you know, just education. And I remember in undergrad, I was graduating from undergrad, and I decided that I wanted to save the world. And so I went into nonprofit work and was very successful in my nonprofit work. I had appeared on Oprah and Good Morning America. I had money. I was in Teen People's Magazine. I helped create the safe haven laws here in Ohio. And I was doing all of this great work. I was self-sufficient, and I just knew I was the stuff in my family. And I went home and I was telling them everything that I was doing. And I'll never forget my great uncle, my great aunt, my grandmother, my aunt. They all looked at me and they were not impressed. And I remember them saying, "So when are you going to do something worthwhile in your life?" And I said, "What? I'm helping the world. What do you mean? I'm doing all of this great work that should be worthwhile." And they said, "Well, no, you don't have a master's degree. No, you don't have any higher education." That was the culture that I grew up in my life. And although all of those people in my life, all of my elders that I grew up with are no longer with us, I almost like every time they were making that transition, their last words to me was, "Well, when are you getting that master's degree? When are you getting that master's degree?" So I have to say, my educational advantage was steeped in the expectations of my family. And as a result of that, as a result of putting me in great schools, as a result of making sure that I had great elementary education, high school education, today I sit before you with 2 master's degrees and a PhD and an educator. Not something I ever thought that I would really do, but that educational advantage was there for me. And I was able to take advantage of that. So we all have advantages. But when equity is not present, it leads to what I would call an advantage gap that perpetuates in our society, our schools, our work environments, and our neighborhoods that may implicitly suggest that everyone doesn't matter. And when people feel they don't matter, they begin to become afraid and desperate for their voice to be heard. In our society, this may lead to social unrest. This may lead to social protest. And although I have an educational advantage, I have a racial advantage gap. And this is largely created by the lack of equity and equitable policies in our society. My first introduction to my racial advantage gap was in high school. And I like to tell stories, so bear with me, I'm a storyteller. I was a junior in high school, and my high school was pretty even or equal in terms of race. It was pretty much 50% white students at that time, 50% Black students at that time. It was a very resourceful high school. Race really didn't play a part in my education from 7th grade to my senior year, until one incident. And I didn't realize that I had a racial advantage gap until this incident. My junior year, our high school decided that they no longer wanted to celebrate Black History Month. They decided that they wanted to make it Multicultural Month. And they were no longer going to call it Black History Month. They did not talk to students. They didn't talk to parents. It was just a decision that they made, that the administration made, and no one knew anything. So then February comes and they say, well, not only are we not going to call this Black History Month, we are going to celebrate a different culture every day of the month. And we're going to celebrate Black history on February 28th. This is a true story. And on February 28th, the way that they were going to celebrate Black history was they were going to serve beans and cornbread for lunch. And they told us that that was our Black history. And for the first time in my life, I realized, whoa, wait a minute. I'm Black. I'm different. I don't belong. And I didn't have that sense before that. And this was like my first introduction into activism and using my voice to change for good. And so I wasn't a leader at that time in my school, but the seniors led and organized a protest. And our high school, once again, was really big. There was 500 students in my class. There was 500 students in each class. So we had a huge school, and our school was so big that they named the hallways. We had names, Hollywood and Vine, and then we had a name, Times Square. And so the Black students, about 1,000 of us, decided that we were going to all meet, instead of going to lunch to eat their beans and cornbread, we were going to meet in Times Square, and we were going to wear all Black, and we were going to let our voices be heard. See, the issue wasn't that we didn't want to celebrate other cultures. The issue was we didn't want to be erased. And when you have an advantage gap, you're literally, it leads to erasing people's lived experiences. And we wanted our lived experiences to matter just as much as any other group in our school. And so our sit-in happened, and that was like some negotiation and some communication. And we got to meet our superintendent that we had no idea who he was. And we got to meet the principal of the whole school, which we didn't know who he was, because every class, because we were so big, we all had our own individualized principals. So the principal of the whole school, we didn't even know who that was. So all of these principals, the superintendent, they're coming in, and we begin to talk and share and allow them to understand why this was so important. And as a result of that communication, as a result of really looking at, maybe this isn't equitable, what we're getting ready to do, we were able to keep Black History Month and create an organization called Tapestry, which would include all cultures and allow us to celebrate everyone's cultural ethnicity backgrounds. So my advantage gap of race imprinted on me as a junior. Then I was introduced the second time. And so this began to be a theme. And the second time was at The Ohio State University as an undergrad. So I leave high school and I go to Ohio State. And once again, I think, yep, I'm here. I have all these advantages. I'm going to be a great student. This is going to be awesome. And I get there, and on campus, I find that the university was wanting to dismantle Office of Minority Affairs. And I literally had just finished with something like this in high school. And so I joined an organization, and what resulted with that was we ended up leading the longest sit-in in history at Ohio State, an 8-day sit-in, to basically say, once again, halt, we matter. We matter. Our voices matter. Our Black faculty matter. Our Black student population matter. No, you cannot just destroy the Black Cultural Center. As a result, the Black Cultural Center stayed. The restructuring of minority affairs did not necessarily happen. Faculty were able to keep their jobs, and the creation of the Multicultural Center is a result of that. And so once again, seeing that there was these needs for all people to be recognized, how do, as Eric described, how do we tear that wall down, right? How do we get rid of the wall so that everyone can see that gain? We create what everyone needs. We don't take away in order to change policy, we add. And that's the essence of equity. The essence of equity is adding. You should have more, you shouldn't have less. So many people in our society experience racial advantage gaps as part of their lived experiences in this country. And I want to just talk a few minutes about the history of the Black Lives Matter movement and social protest. So our world began to acknowledge this gap most recently in 2013. And really what led to this was in July, the movement began with the use of a hashtag, social media, and the hashtag was BLM. And it happened after the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, which happened 17 months earlier in 2012. The purpose of the Black Lives Matter movement when it started was to fight racism and anti-Black violence, especially in the form of police brutality. This was a real experience, lived experience for Black people in this country, where this notion of safety or safer spaces, right, was not necessarily their reality and how they were living. And so the Black Lives Matter movement shined a light on that. And what it demanded was that society values the lives and humanity of Black people as much as it valued the lives and humanity of all other people, right? Like, once again, we matter. And that just keeps ringing. We matter, we matter. The Black Lives Matter movement represented a collective voice that wanted to be seen. They wanted to be heard. And it spurred protests all around our country. But it did something else that I think was even more powerful. It led to conversation. And anti-racism began to be a topic. It began to be something that was on everyone's minds, right? So anti-racism is the policy or practice of opposing racism. And as Eric said earlier, and as Sarah said, people really started buying books and started trying to educate themselves, going to seminars and bringing in trainings into their organizations and their schools, into their corporations on how to be an anti-racist, right? And anti-racism is usually structured around the conscious efforts, right? Not something that we fall into, not something that we just come upon, something that we actually deliberately focus on. Deliberate actions to provide equitable opportunities for all people of an individual and on an individual and systematic level. And the Black Lives Matter movement really spurred this. If it did nothing else, it had us begin to think, reflect, and go inside to say, wait a minute, something needs to change here. We must do something. The most recent death of George Floyd birthed a wave of individuals who began to desire to do something different in this country. And at that point, humanity gained hope. An anti-racism movement picked up momentum. I would like to offer that as people who belong to each other, we need to be anti anything that aims to threaten anything that goes against humanity. Let me say that again. As people who belong to each other, if I am you and you are me, and we belong to each other, we just don't need to be anti-sexist. We just don't need to be anti-racist. We need to be anti-anything that threatens anything that goes against humanity. That's where the real work begins. Bystanders, people who don't speak up against things that goes against humanity, we're just part of that problem. When we are bystanders, when we are silent, when we allow things that threatens our humanity to continue to happen, we perpetuate pain, hurt, tragedy, abuse, neglect, all things bad for our society. When I'm in classrooms, and I wish we were together in person, but I do this exercise with an apple and some sugar. It kind of goes to this notion of kinesiology. And I try to teach my students that your body knows what's good for you. And what I do is I get the strongest person in the room and I ask them to volunteer and come up. And I show them through the use of a fruit, an apple, and sugar, candy, something sweet, not necessarily good for your body, how your body can absorb the good nutrients or reject the bad nutrients that, or bad candy sugar rush that you have. And they never believe me. And so what I do is I have them hold the apple in one hand, and their dominant hand, I ask them to put it out. And I'm really short. I'm 5'1", small frame, don't have a lot of muscles. And I say, I'm gonna push your arm down while you're holding this apple. And I go and I try to push down their arm while they're holding the apple, and they have all this strength. And most of the time I can't get that arm to go down because most of the time they're stronger than me. And then I give them the sugar and I ask them to do the same thing. And when I give them the sugar, immediately arm goes down. And they go, no, that's not real. That's just because I was putting all my strength in the apple. That's not real. And so I say, okay, well, take the apple again. Put the apple back in their hand. I push their arm down. Immediately, they get strength again. I put sugar in their hand, push their arm down. Immediately, they get weak. I'm saying this to say, if our bodies know what's good for us, that is the same with our humanity. We inherently know what is good for our humanity, for human beings. And all we have to do is walk in that strength and walk in that power. And when we do that, we become a powerful, powerful group of individuals. So really what this all means is that belonging really begins with you. During this conference, you're going to hear from other speakers in other sessions where they're going to talk about individual and organizational strategies that you could use. They're going to talk about communication strategies. You're going to hear about allyship and strategies, how to be a great ally, how to use your voice, how to use your position, how to use your advantage, right? You're going to reflect on your own personal advantage. What advantages do you have that could be used for the greater good? Because there's nothing wrong with having advantages. It's how you use your advantage, right? As an educator and my educational advantage, I could choose in my classes as a professor to use my educational advantage for bad. I could be a really mean professor and instructor with no flexibility, with no inclusion of lived experiences. I could completely say, you know what? It's all about equality here, right? And you all are in college, you all have the same opportunities, the classes at the exact same time, you all have the material. And so, it doesn't matter what's happening in your life. This is my grading system. I'm going right. I'm going to just use this grading system, not going to stop. This is what the grades you're going to earn, and that's it. How many people have professors how many people have had that experience with a professor? Like, I can't see, but if you have, just like, give me a thumbs up or raise a hand, because we know we have those professors and we're like, but wait a minute. Even in COVID, we have professors that still are like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's due on this day. And so it's not the problem with the advantage. It's about how do you use that advantage? And when you become equitable, when you really embrace equity, when you really embrace that we are all one, you begin to develop compassion and empathy. And all of a sudden, everyone doesn't just fit in the same bucket, right? We actually really get to see individuals for who they are. And when we do that, we really embrace the notion that we all truly matter. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best when he said, everyone has the power for greatness, not fame, but greatness, because greatness is determined by service. It is through service and servant leadership that humanity will gain victory and connect us as one. When we each decide that we are only as great as those that we serve, we're only as great as those that we serve, we will begin to understand that we all belong here and that equity is not a choice, but equity is a human right. Equity is not a choice. Equity is a human right. And we get there by traveling the road of servant leadership. We get there by traveling the road of self-reflection. We get there by traveling the road of belonging to ourselves, belonging to each other, belonging to our world. And with that, I would like to say thank you and ask if there are any questions. And I'm in the chat room, so if you have any questions, this is the time to ask. Quiet, no questions. Not one?
Dr. Benton, I just want to say I love the poem that you read at the beginning. It was really inspiring and
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I just wrote it just for today.
that's fabulous.
And so if anyone would like a copy of that poem, I can type it up and give it to you.
That would be great.
I will make sure you have that. Yes, I will post the poem. So we have a question by Sima. How can educators use their advantage to create more equity? And you want the poem. And so educators, you know, this is my wheelhouse when it comes to equity in education. Really, as an educator, I do a couple of things. One, I throw out grades. I believe in the mastery system, even on a college level, I throw out grades because when we introduce grades, grades is literally the most inequitable system we have in education. It doesn't necessarily show what people know or what they've learned. It's really about, can they follow rules? How disciplined are they? And can they memorize? And everyone doesn't have a great memory. And so I like to approach education with a constructivist viewpoint and use constructivism in my classes. And I give people the opportunity to assess what they know in many different forms. And so some people would like to take a midterm with multiple choice and essay questions because they have a great memory. Some people would like to demonstrate it by putting together an amazing presentation on what they learned. Some people would like to use their hands and build something that shows and demonstrates what they learned. And so when I'm teaching classes, I build in all of those opportunities for everyone. Another thing that you can do to create more equity in your classroom, and seems really like minor, but actually learn their names, learn your students' names, know how to pronounce them, actually get to know them. I'm teaching this course, I'm teaching a couple of courses at Temple online. And so, you know, online is this it's different. But I make an a point to actually talk to all 40 of my students online. I get to know them. I go into their small breakout rooms. I ask them about things other than school. How are you today? We do check-ins. I have one student that it's a leadership class, communication leadership class. And this particular student, I noticed after about the third class that she always showed up 15 minutes early. And so I actually really got to learn about why. And I used to go by this my own quote that leaders show up 15 minutes ahead of the rest of the world. And she talked to me about her experience and why it's so important for her to be on time and to be early. And that told me so much about who she was as an individual. And what it did was make me a better instructor, because since she's 15 minutes early, I'm 20 minutes early. I make sure that room is open for her because that's how she feels settled. And so when you get to know your students, when you get to know who they are and their lived experiences, you really balance your classroom to be so inclusive that everyone feels welcomed, everyone feels accepted, everyone feels like they matter. And that looks different really for all of your students. And I don't necessarily think it's that hard. A lot of people say, well, we have so many kids. Well, in a big lecture hall, yes. But when you're in your regular classes, 30 kids, not that hard to get to know. In my classes, you're gonna get an A or you're gonna get an F. Because even when you mess up, you're doing it again and you're doing it again until you learn it. There aren't any the objective is to learn. The objective isn't for me to make sure that you know how to follow all my rules. And so I have a different approach, and I use servant leadership as my model. I'm a servant leader. So thank you for that question, Sima.
Dr. Benton, I have a follow-up question on the flip side of that. For the students that are in the audience, what advice would you have for them to give them agency to speak up and have conversations with adults or leaders, or if they're working and going to school, managers, on creating that equity and creating that space as they kind of branch out and they're getting ready to start out in adult world, where a lot of these things are kind of going to be a little bit of a culture shock right at first. And then once they're eased in, they'll want to begin having these conversations.
You know, I would say show up as your authentic self, right? I think that's the first thing. A lot of times we show up as our mask, as what we want people to see, instead of allowing them to see who we really are. And so when you're in classes, when you go into the workforce, first show up as who you really are and be confident in who you really are and use your voice. Another thing is get involved, right? True equity happens when we build relationships, and you build relationships by being involved. You get to know people by being involved. I've done some crazy things to try to understand and embrace other individuals. Like, for instance, I went and worked at White Castle's for 30 days. One, because I wanted to know how they made those little burgers, right? But two, I wanted to know and have that experience of what it was like to work in the fast food industry. And I did it at a time where I was very successful. I didn't need to go work at White Castle's, but it gave me an insight, right, about a group of people in an industry that I had no idea about. I also did things like worked at Asian American Community Services. I worked with their youth. I helped create their youth program. Because I wanted to understand, I was having a lot of Asian students in my classes, and I really wanted to understand their culture. And so I went and volunteered and began to work with the Asian population so that I can understand the students that I served better. And so I showed up as my authentic self. I was open to be right in agency with others' authentic self as well. And so I think that it's a combination of all those things. Make a friend that's different from you. Like, that's okay. Like, not just different ethnically wise, right? But different, period. I have a lot of friends. Like, I'm very, very conservative, and actually I'm an introvert. And I know people probably won't believe that, but I'm an introvert. And so I really do my best to try to understand and be a part of extroverts, right? And I try to relax some of my conservative views and my conservative ways, because I have a lot of liberal friends. And that's stretching. And so I think that you have to kind of go within and stretch yourself so that you can truly embrace humanity, embrace the world around you, and find the good in all, because everyone has good. So did I answer your question, Sarah?
Absolutely. I wanted to ask that just because I know going into the workforce, it took a manager kind of inviting me in more than 12 years ago to the DEI space, and my passion grew. So I love what you said. I just wrote that down also about educating on other race and cultures. That's the one thing that I began to do. I know that universities have their own form of employee resource groups, but every organization that I've worked for has employee resource groups. So I took the time to learn a little bit of introduction to Spanish with the Spanish resource group, or Hispanic resource group. Now I am heavily involved with our Amazon Asians at Amazon group, trying to educate on how I can be a better ally and show up for them in these times they're experiencing right now. So I really love that you kind of hit that, because it's something that I naturally do, but a lot of people don't know that there are those opportunities out there. So I love that you targeted on that.
Absolutely. Marilyn in the chat said that at Denison, and I love Denison, I would love to be at Denison, conducted a belonging survey to get a sense of whether their international students felt a sense of belonging in our campus. Marilyn, what did the survey report? What did it find?
You know, we weren't able to do it this past year, but we were hoping to do it each year to get a sense of, as our population is growing, that, you know, the more international students you have, the more it normalizes their presence on campus. We still hear from students that, you know, they want to make friends with Americans, and there's still often that gap. I actually just talked to a student yesterday about this, and because he happened to be just in a residence hall where there were very few international students, he just had to make friends. So, and he was welcomed. But it is that when you have a visible identity, you're often perceived to only be with, you know, wanting to be with your own group. You know, if it's a group of students from China, you know, that are friends together and they eat together. And we always remind them, well, you know, the swimmers are eating together, the soccer players are eating together, but you don't see that visible identity. So
unless we create it though, right, Marilyn? So like we can create that visible identity for them. That's not something that always has to happen from an outside, from them when they're coming into our spaces, right? We can do things like have celebrate their cultures. We could have things that actually bring everyone together on issues that concern them. We can begin to adapt things that are pertinent to who they are. So to give you a perfect example, I'm so unorthodox when it comes to this, but I have a lot of Muslim students. They come, they're covered in their hijab, especially the females. You can identify females more than you can your male students, because the females typically wear the hijab and the male students don't wear what they're supposed to wear. And so when a Muslim student comes into my room and I see them even on the college level or even on the high school level, I greet them with their greeting. Assalamu alaikum. I'm not Muslim, but I greet them with their greeting, and you should see them. The smile that comes in their heart is like, and they're like, oh my gosh, like you acknowledged me, you know? And then of course the first question is, are you Muslim? And then I say, I love all cultures. So I don't even answer the question, right? And then the next thing that I do, which I think is very, very important, Muslims pray 5 times a day. Sometimes their prayers happen during our class time. Now, I don't have to do this, but I invite them in and I say, you know what? I whisper to them, if you want to step out and go pray, you can. And they're like, really? Like, absolutely. I don't know where you are. That's no different than allowing someone to go use the restroom. That's no different than someone stepping outside to take care of some other business or take a phone call. But just by the mere fact of me bringing them into the space and giving them the space to really be their authentic self helps them feel like they belong there as well. So sometimes we can create those spaces.
Yeah, that sense of belonging is so important. And often students, it may be their department where they feel like they really belong. It's so different for each student, but we really felt like it was an important thing to do each year to see, if there are any trends. And so we'll be planning to resume it again, but it's such an important piece of their experience at Denison. And so I appreciate that you talked about that today. Mattering and belonging it really is something that I think about every day in their experience.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So it's 9:54, and I want to give you time to have a little break before we go right into our next concurrent session. I'll be teaching another session. And so for all of those that signed up for the session, we will continue this conversation of advantage and what really advantage means and how to really work with this ideal that we have advantages. And so I want to thank everyone. I hope you have a great conference, and I will see you at the end of the conference if you're not in my session. Thank you so much for today.
Yes. And thank you so much, Dr. Benton. We are at 9:55, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10:05, and we have 3 different breakout rooms. The first breakout room is led by Jeremy Blake, Ray Stewart, Deb Dingus, and Brandy Body. The Power of Advantage: Engaging with Diverse Populations in the Workplace. Second breakout room, Jessica McAleer, Marilyn, Jorrey, Patty Coots, and Penny Sittler, What You Say and Why You Say It. And then Chanda, Jennifer, and Anna have the third breakout room, Advocacy and Allyship for Equity in the Workplace. When you return from your break at 10:05, you should find yourself in those breakout rooms. Again, I strongly encourage you to participate in these breakout rooms, learn from one another, what works, what doesn't work with your businesses, organizations, your community leadership, in order to learn from one another. So we will see you back at 10:05.